What I'm wondering is how Camden forged the man you are today and the work you've been doing for the last 4 decades.
I grew up in what was Time Magazine's worst city in America, and I grew up in the worst conditions in the worst city in America, the so-called broken home, but in Camden, all the homes were broken. When you think about things from an overprivileged point of view to an underprivileged point of view, you begin to see that there's this thing called enoughness, preventing people from understanding and dealing with inclusivity. And that inclusivity doesn't mean that I like you. I have to learn how to be tolerant of this person. I have to learn how to like this person. It's like, no, I don't. Lots and lots of people on this planet I don't like. I'd rather not be in the same room with them. But I do have to recognize that this is my brother or my sister.
I'm Zoe Weil, and this is Solutionary Voices, a podcast brought to you by the Institute for Humane Education. On this podcast, we bring together guests on the forefront of building a more humane, just, and healthy world for all people, animals, and the ecosystems that sustain life. This is the mission of our organization and the great hope of solutionaries everywhere. Today I'm speaking with Shariff Abdullah, author of Creating a World That Works for All. The name pretty much sums up Shariff's life's work. Since writing this award-winning book and speaking widely, sharing its message, Shariff has founded the Commonway Institute to help people create such a world. I'm guessing most of the audience listening to this podcast would like to be part of the unfolding of a world that works for all. And I'm excited to talk to Shariff about how we can transform ourselves and transform the world. Welcome, Shariff.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Well, it's lovely to see you again. It's been many years since we've actually seen each other. And the way we begin every podcast episode is to ask our guests, what problem are you working to solve?
I've been thinking about how do I answer that question. I think that the answer is probably about 4 decades old. And that is, how do we, from the mess that we've got right now, how do we create a world that works for all living beings? And on the one hand, that seems like, oh yeah, sure, we all love that. We all want to make the world a better place. And then when people realize that it's not something that you just say and then you go and do something else, at that point, things get different. And I've been living in that difference for about 4 decades, looking at how, in some ways, the world's gotten a lot worse, but in another way, it's gotten ready to be birthing a new world and a new society. The other thing we realize about a birthing process is that it's inevitable. You're not the one that calls the shots of when it starts. You're not the one that calls the shots of how long it's going to take. And you're not the one that determines the outcome. All of this stuff, we need to have a whole other level of involvement. And for some of us, we do. And for a lot of us, in fact, for most of us, we're ignoring the birth process. It's like, okay, that's something that'll happen to those people over there. And it doesn't work that way. Our choices are becoming more acute regarding how it doesn't work that way.
So you've written that it's only through a profound shift in consciousness that a new society can be born, and that the shift is from the concept that I'm separate to the realization that we are one. And I'm wondering how people can embark on the journey for that shift to happen.
I find it interesting that when I'm talking with people, I tell them, talk about creating a world that works for all. Oh yes, oh sure, I'm right with you there. and that we need more inclusivity. And, oh, yeah, I believe in inclusivity. And then I'll ask a question. How do you practice inclusivity with someone like Donald Trump? And all it's like, wait, we're not talking about him, saying things about him that they wouldn't say about any other human being or any other being. It's an interesting dynamic. I don't see people indifferent. People are either so passionately, this is the second coming of Christ, to also passionately, this is the Antichrist, that I say, no, you have to take a step back. He lives on your planet. He's breathing your air. He's part of your family. He may be a part of your family that you don't particularly appreciate their behavior, but part of your family. So now, how do you practice inclusivity? And so that's a question that I've been asking myself, and I've been asking in all the work that I do. When you are looking at oppositional energy, how do you deal with that in such a way that the planet actually works for all? We're willing to attribute life to non-living beings more than attributing life to the flesh and blood and interacting and talking beings that are all around us. And so our challenge is we have to change. When I say we have to change, everybody says, oh yes, we have to change. And what they mean by that is that guy over there, they have to change. They're the ones that need to change. I'm fine. My friends are fine. And all those folks over there need to change.
Shariff, can you tell us about the keepers and the breakers and the menders?
This is a concept that shows up in creating a world that works for all. I've been to lots of countries. I've encountered lots of different cultures, different languages, different religious beliefs. But I saw that people were grouped into what I called three significant consciousness groups. And these groups are based solely on how they interact with their world. I was stimulated to think this way because of something that Albert Einstein said many decades ago. We can't solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created the problem in the first place. Now, you've seen that on posters everywhere. People have it pinned on their office doors, etc. And whenever they go to try to solve a conflict, they apply the same consciousness that they grew up with, the same consciousness that created the problem, and therefore they keep wondering why the problems don't change. When I started looking at from this global view, I saw these three levels of consciousness, and I call them the keepers, the breakers, and the menders. And by the keepers, I'm talking about what we call indigenous people. That's not quite accurate because I think of myself as a thinker, as a keeper. But these are the people who have been part of our process, part of the earth for their entire lives. They see themselves as an integral part of the earth. They see themselves as an integral part of the earth family. As you know, many of the Native American keeper groups refer to all other living beings as all our relations. So I'm related to them. And when I'm living my life with them, for them, and they're living their lives for us. And so there's this mutual connectivity, and that's what I call inclusivity. Then you've got a second consciousness group, And the second consciousness group is what I call the breakers. And the breakers are the people who break the sacred hoop, which is what the keepers talk about as the earth, as the world, that it all goes around. It's a hoop. And you may call that cyclical processes. The breakers say, I'm not part of the earth. I live on top of the earth. That the earth is my playground, the earth is my piggy bank, and the earth is my cesspool. I can do anything I want to the earth, and then nothing comes back to me. I don't experience any bad things until you start experiencing bad things, and then you'll create more bad things to try to ameliorate those bad things, and you keep that cycle going until that cycle stops. And that's what's about to come to a very abrupt stop. And the third group is in the book I call the menders. And the menders are those of us who are steeped in the culture and the consciousness of the breakers. I went to breaker schools my entire life. I raised in breaker societies. I got 2 breaker degrees, and that gets you to a certain point. And that point you're at is a point you don't want to be. And so while we have all that, while I've got all that, it's time for us to do something else. It's time for us to start copying the consciousness, the value structures, and the behaviors of the keepers. It's time for us to re-indigenate. It's time for us to go back to a process where you think about all of the steps of the process as you're going along.
So I'm going to come back to that too. And because you mentioned Camden, where you grew up, and as you know, I did some work in a school for kids who'd been kicked out of schools for kids who'd been kicked out of schools. So the last stop before prison in Camden for a couple of years, regularly going into the school and talking to the kids. And I often, wonder if we crossed paths on Camden streets. But what I'm wondering is how Camden forged the man you are today and the work you do, for the work you've been doing for the last 4 decades.
I grew up in what was Time Magazine's worst city in America. We were number 1. And I grew up in the worst conditions in the worst city in America, the so-called broken home. But in Camden, all the homes were broken, on welfare, in public housing, kind of the poster boy of the bottom. For some reason, and I think it's called the grace of God, I was really smart, and our television broke. And so what do you do without a television? And somebody said, there's a building over there with a whole bunch of books in it. And I remember walking into, there's a Carnegie Library. So when you walk into the main floor, it's literally like walking into a temple. I had this ecstatic experience just being in all this dark wood, and the stacks go up a few levels, and you walk up to the horseshoe desk that's right in the middle, and the woman says, "No, you go down in the basement with the kiddie section." But I got to be up there for a few minutes. I got down to the kiddie section. This is more human sized, and I started reading the books. And I decided I'd start with A, in the A section, and all the books that were in English, I read all of them. And Camden at one point in time was a real melting pot, lots of different cultures coming through. And so there were all these sections of the kiddie library that was in Spanish, that was in Russian, that was in languages. I'm looking, and there's nothing that looks like the ABCs on the page, So I got this well-rounded education by just starting on this side and going over to that side. This was not because of our educational system, but despite the educational system. So all this time, I'm scoring in the 99th percentile on my standardized tests. That is considered intelligence, but I think it's just that I can see the algorithm that the test is built on, and I can ace the algorithm. In Camden, that got me accused of cheating a lot. Some of my teachers said, "No, you're just cheating," and they're looking for slips of paper or whatever. I'm like, keep looking. Some of my teachers, though, and I couldn't figure out what the deal was, but some of my teachers would take me out of my regular classes and this is before there was anything called gifted and talented. This is just some kid that has a really, really big mouth. And so there was some honing going on. And I didn't see it then, but I really appreciated it after a while, after I got into college. And they had introduced things to me that you could never experience. Camden, at one point in time, this is after I left to college, it couldn't afford to keep its libraries open. And so they boarded them up, and homeless people pulled the boards off, and to try to stay warm, they set the books on fire and burned the whole thing down. I remember when I heard that, it's like, here's one more escape route that got shut down. Again, the grace of God that I was able to use the escape route and get out, not just physically, but getting out spiritually, getting out psychologically, getting out culturally.
That's quite a lot. Not only what you grew up with and how the library saved you and how the library was destroyed because of our breaker systems, really.
Let me say one more thing about the library. It was literally a Carnegie library. Back when Andrew Carnegie was just dropping libraries everywhere. I mean, we got a whole lot more billionaires than we had back in those days. The bottom line is we live in a society that needs an awful lot, and we don't have a whole lot of folks answering that.
So I'm going to push back on that just a little and then dive into a little of the complexity around this, because Andrew Carnegie was not a keeper. One could argue he was a breaker for a long time and then tried to be a mender through philanthropy. And there's a movement among many billionaires to commit to giving away a minimum of, I can't remember if it's half or 90% of their wealth in their lifetime, not when they die, but in their lifetime. And many are philanthropists. Many aren't, for sure. Many are. And one could argue that making a beautiful library is not as important as, let's say, making vastly more libraries cheaper that may not be as beautiful. Although I share your sense of awe and joy in walking into a beautiful old library. I grew up very differently from you. And when my mother took me to our local library and I walked in, I felt that same awe. I could not believe I could just take home as many books as I wanted. And every week we would go and I would take out all these books, and they were like treasures for that week. So I share that. I want to share a quote of yours with you and then ask you a question about it. So you write that humans create the problems that we experience. And while it's easy to blame multinational corporations, power-mad politicians, racial and ethnic elites, gender politics, and other factors, and indeed, these actors do bear significant responsibility for the shape things are in right now, the bottom line is that we, ordinary people, create this world by our actions, our inactions, and our acquiescence to the bad leadership of others. So with that quote of yours in mind, what are some concrete actions that you would recommend that we take to create a world that works for all?
I am in the realm of the keepers, that if what you're doing is really wanted and needed by the earth, it's also going to be beautiful. I think it's interesting that for the keepers, many of them have no word for beauty. There's no word for it because it's the fish don't talk about water. It's infusing all of us. And if it isn't infusing all of us, then we're doing something fundamentally wrong. I've had to work on my heart because it was as shrunken as everybody else's heart coming out of Camden. That heart work is the most important work that we can do. So if we wind up getting somebody all the books they need, making sure they get health checkups every 6 months, or you can do all the stuff. If you're going to do it right. That's what I would ask. And do it right would mean do it with your heart in mind. Some years ago, I was working in Sri Lanka with Dr. A.T. Aryaratne, the legendary founder and leader of Sarvodaya Shramadana. He was known as the Gandhi of Sri Lanka. He had created something he called the 10 basic village needs, that everybody needs these 10 things. When I read his list of the 10 things that everybody needs to have in their lives, I realized that this was stated in terms of a villager in a rural area in an underdeveloped country, but you could state these same things from the perspective of anybody else on the planet. Everybody on the planet needs this. Some of us need more in some directions, and some of us need less in other directions. And so being able to think about the 12 needs in a global capacity and start asking the question, do you have enough? Looking at how you measure enoughness, and looking at how, when you think about things from an overprivileged point of view to an underprivileged point of view, you begin to see that there's this thing called enoughness. And if we can hit enoughness, then we will be understanding what creating a world that works for all actually means.
If we create this world by our actions and our inactions and our acquiescence to bad leadership, how do we change? What does that look like?
Very early on, affected by the Black Power movement, and was very much affected by Malcolm X. And the notion that Camden was created by white racism sounded good to me, and I became an advocate of Black Power very early on. It took a while. It took me going to college before I realized that people other than Black people had problems, and that people other than white people were creating the problems. There's a psychological term for it. I don't remember it right now, but it's the reason that people didn't get in the boats on the Titanic. That would be part of it, but it's something that you do in a disaster situation. The disaster's not happening to me. I would be doing two things, and those two things are the same thing. The two things are, I would be creating situations for me and my family and my closest beings to survive and thrive in a situation where the entire Titanic is going down. The other thing I would be doing is creating an entirely new civilization. That what we've got right now is a civilization born of a consciousness, and that consciousness is I am separate. And that consciousness gives us every system that we can see right now. The consciousness of capitalism and the consciousness of communism. It's all the same thing. It's all based on notions of I am separate and I will survive. And if I have to survive stepping on other people, then so be it, etc. As opposed to saying, how do we survive? Now, once we get to how do we survive, we are going to create whole new institutions, whole new ways of us being one with all other human beings, and ways of us being with all other living beings, including the 10 trillion or so living beings that are in your own body. We don't respect any of them. If any of them get in the way of this notion of what's good for me, at some point in time, we're going to recognize that that's not a really good thing to do. And we will actually begin to have conversations that matter, conversations with beings acting like we are superior to. And this is what I've been working on over the course of the last maybe 5 or 6 years or so. My work would be a lot easier if I could steer people closer to the boats that say, you need to get off of the Titanic right now. There are people who will recognize the truth of what I'm saying.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question about antibiotics because I think that's what you're talking about, or you were talking about. So I'd be dead without antibiotics. I would have died as a kid. In your mind, is getting off the boat not taking antibiotics and then taking probiotics afterwards? I mean, I actually can't take antibiotics now because I'm allergic to every antibiotic I've been put on as an adult. And that scares me because an infection could kill me. Am I hearing you right in saying, would you not take antibiotics to save your life?
I would take antibiotics to save my life. I would take antibiotics to make my life more comfortable. I would take antibiotics with consciousness. The only thing I'm asking of, only thing right now I'm asking of me and I'm asking of people is for you to be conscious that you are made up of 10 trillion beings that are not you, not your DNA. And you have a responsibility for that community. And when I put food in this part of the community and this entire ecosystem here under the sweatshirt, the entire ecosystem is either benefiting from that or ignoring it. Okay. But the bottom line is I'm going to do that in concert with everyone else, with all of the other beings. What I'm suggesting is I want you to care about all of it. I want you to care about all of us. You go down because you have not built community, because you have not practiced inclusivity. Don't be surprised.
I actually appreciate when somebody says to me, I just don't care. And this happened about a year ago when somebody asked me to watch a video of somebody whose views were really different from my own. And I'll watch anything. So I watched the video. And then I asked him if he'd watch a video for me. And the video was Earthlings. I don't know if you've seen it, but it is a video that uncovers some of the ghastly atrocities that we commit on non-human animals. And there's a large section on how we treat the animals who we eat in this culture. So he watched the video, because I think I shamed him into watching the video by saying, well, I watched your video. And he said it's not going to change his diet. And I said, this was all through email. I'm like, why not? And he finally just said in an email, Zoe, I just don't care. And I was relieved to have somebody just finally say that to me, as opposed to, oh yeah, it's so awful, but not change, but just say I don't care. So how do we create a world that works for all when such a large percentage of the population, I don't know what that percentage is, but a large percentage just don't care?
I'm right where you are, because I talk to people until I get to that point of, I want what I want, and I want to be ignorant of the rest of it. I want to be ignorant of the effects of it. Right now we're dropping bombs on somebody else's country. We've been doing that in somebody else's countries for an awful long time. And as long as I'm not the one under the bomb, then fine. What I want to be able to do is have people get to that point of saying, I don't care. And then have them recognize, well, when somebody else gets to that point, and it's your child that you want them to be concerned about, when they say that about your children, recognize where that comes from. It comes from somewhere inside of you. Václav Havel, the former dissident and who became the president of of Czechoslovakia, then the Czech Republic, and the guy who wrote the introduction to my book, Creating a World That Works for All, said that the victim and the victimizer runs right through each of our hearts. I am, in part, a victim of the society that we've created. If I want to be appreciated on this planet, then I need to appreciate others. The question isn't whether you eat the animals. The question is whether or not you're conscious. And we have been killing animals with a disregard for the liveliness of this being, the preciousness of this being. I've just had a really great life. And part of the great life is being in lots and lots of other cultures and looking at how people honor their food. In this area, I'm in the Pacific Northwest, and in this area, many of the keepers lived on salmon. And the way they caught salmon was with dip nets. So you dip the net into the river and they pull a salmon out, or two salmon out, or as many as would jump into their nets. The first thing they would do when the salmon season came was the entire tribe would fast. And the next day they would catch one fish for the entire tribe. And everybody, from the eldest down to the youngest child, would get one piece of that fish. And that would put their spirit in the fish and put the fish's spirit in them. And so at that point, they would then spend a month or so catching fish. And they have these like piers that would go out over the water. And their issue at that point was trying to catch only 2 or 3 fish per net. Now, these fish are 100 pounds. Okay, so they'd have to haul a few 100 pounds of fish up out of the water. And the fish were busy jumping into their nets. This is you can see this on old films. The film of what Celilo Falls looked like before the breakers dammed the river and killed the fish. And the fish were like 3 of them, 4 of them at a time, jumping into the nets. You know how the fish will, they're swimming upstream, so they jump and they jump, and they were aiming for the nets.
I recently had Bruce Friedrich on the podcast. He just wrote the book Meat, and he talks about and writes about how we need to completely change our systems of acquiring protein. And we have 8.2 billion people. It's not possible for 8.2 billion people to eat animals and have wild animals left on the planet, which is why we created these factory farming systems. And of course, the lower we eat on the food chain, the more abundance we have of healthy ecosystems and other species on our planet and biodiversity.
I've been challenged by a number of people who have been supporters of Commonway that you can't do this, Shariff. You should be vegan. And I would welcome having that as a conscious conversation. According to Reverend Sandra, that ain't conscious enough.
Well, that's interesting, because one of the questions that I have for you, and we will need to wrap up shortly, but I'm curious, what have been your own struggles in applying the principles and practices that you teach others?
Preventing people from understanding and dealing with inclusivity. And that inclusivity doesn't mean that I like you. Okay. And that a lot of people are thinking, oh, I have to learn how to be tolerant of this person. I have to learn how to like this person. It's like, no, I don't. Lots and lots of people on this planet I don't like. I'd rather not be in the same room with them. But I do have to recognize that this is my brother or my sister. And as a brother or a sister, I have to treat them a particular way. If I don't do that, then I'm harming something that's in me. It's not that I'm harming them, I'm harming something that's in me. On the consulting level, I work with organizations on their levels of inclusivity. But anyway, I get called into organizations that are experiencing some disharmony in the workforce. And the folks that I wind up working with are white, male, blue collar. When I'm working with them, they see me as the problem. They don't like me. I don't try to be liked by them. I will tell them, no one is paying me to like you. No one's paying me for us to like each other. We have to treat each other a particular way. And by the time I get done with my work, they will say, it's like, I still don't like you, but I'm going to treat you the way I want to be treated. And that's about all that you can ask. That's all that you should ask at this point. And so our challenge is, can we learn how to act as one, even though we are not in concert with each other?
When you were referencing Havel and we can have these two sides, I think we can also be keepers and breakers and menders in each of us. And I feel that. I feel the keeper energy, the breaker energy, and the mender energy in me, striving to be more a mender all the time, and to live with a deep keeper heart. So here's the observation that I want to make, and then I have one last question for you. So many, many years ago, when we had shared a meal together, we did the same thing that we've done in this conversation, which was all over the place. And you did this thing where you took the salt shaker and you put it here when we were talking about something, and because you were going to go in a different tangent, and you said, this will be that. And then we'd go in a different tangent and something would spark. And then you'd take one of the sugar packets and you'd put it somewhere else on the table and say, okay, this will be that. So we would always come back and weave it all together. And I feel like, first of all, I've done that now with other people. It was like, oh, Shariff gave me this little tool to get me back to all these things and then weave it all together. And I do feel like we did that during this conversation. And so my last question for you is, what would you like your epitaph to be?
I think the only thing I can say within that, within a bracket, is that I actually lived in accordance with my vision and my values.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Shariff. Thank you for tuning in to Solutionary Voices. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please review, subscribe, and share whatever is of value. And if you would like to be a solutionary yourself, I invite you to read my book, The Solutionary Way. Thanks so much.